Hello, my name is Alexi Beauregard, registered dietitian in the Savannah, Georgia area. Thank you for joining me for this quick discussion on nutrition for mom and baby or child in breastfeeding. And I wanted to point out that it's important to note that not much research is available on how the composition of breast milk changes after a child reaches 12 months of age. But there's some that's out there, and here's what we do know. We do know that carbohydrate levels remain pretty stable between 1 and 12 months. And then another group, when they looked at milk composition in children who are 12 to 18 months of age, the levels remain fairly stable. And then we see that the levels actually decreased in moms who are still breastfeeding between 18 and 24 months, but then the levels of carbohydrates remain pretty stable after 24 months. Fat, the lowest levels of fat are seen in breast milk that's feeding children between 1 and 12 months of age, but then the levels of fat significantly increase in the breast milk for children that are receiving it from 12 to 18 months of age. It's increased again from 18 to 24 months of age, and then it increases again after 24 months of age. So I know some of this looking at this data in this way is a little bit cumbersome, but the reason why the researchers are breaking it down into these age groups is because obviously there's a big difference in what a child at 12 months of age is eating versus a child at 18 months of age versus 24 months of age. So I know that it gets a little bit wordy and cumbersome, but please bear with me. And that's why, because we're clearly demands and how a child grows is going to be very different when we look at all these different age groups. So carbohydrates are remaining fairly stable, and then they decrease. Fat is lowest level between 1 and 12 months of age, but then it's increasing again when the child's between 12 and 18 months. It's increasing again when the child's between 18 and 24 months, and then it increases again once the child reaches 24 months and then beyond. Protein levels increase between 1 and 12 months. They stay pretty stable between 12 and 18 months, but then they increase again between 18 and 24 months, and then again after 24 months. So what we're noticing is that as the child grows, the composition of breast milk is changing to meet the demands of the growing child. Now let's just talk about just calories, energy. It's the lowest between 1 and 12 months of age. It significantly increases between 12 and 18 months. Then the calorie content increases again between 18 and 24 months. And then that we see the highest level, the highest caloric density after 24 months. Now there's some different thoughts as to why the caloric density increases after 24 months. Could it be that mom is just not breastfeeding as often? And so is that why? Or how much of it is because the breast milk composition is, actually changing? So the science on that isn't entirely clear yet, but what we can say with confidence is that the caloric density of the breast milk is at its highest level after 24 months. So as we just said, the breast milk composition changes to meet the demands of the growing child, which is great news when children are being breastfed for extended periods of time. There's a really intense growing period between 1 and 3 years of age, and the breast milk composition will support growth between 1 and 3 years of age when it's used as a supplemental feeding source. Concentrations of fat and protein stabilize after 24 months. Sources of calories in breast milk for older children is mainly fat and protein. Why is that? Because that's really what a growing body needs between 1 and 3 years of age. Fat is really important for a growing brain, and that brain grows really quickly between 1 and 3 years. And when you think about growth spurts in toddlers, that protein is really needed as well for all kinds of metabolic processes in the body, and including building lean body mass, whereas the carbohydrates make up the bulk of the calories earlier in life. So there is a general decline in the concentration of zinc and calcium in breast milk. Lactating women do have an increased need for iodine, selenium, and zinc. When it comes to vitamins, we do know that vitamins from mom are secreted into the breast milk. So the dietary requirement for most vitamins is increased during lactation. Moms do need to be monitored for vitamin D insufficiency or deficiency. If mom is vegetarian, vegan, or if she's post-bariatric surgery, she needs to have her vitamin B12 monitored. The body will secrete folate into breast milk preferentially. So if mom has low stores or diminishing stores of folate, the body will continue to secrete that into the breast milk. So it's important that mom's also watching her folate intake as well. The American Academy of Pediatrics does not put a time limit on the duration of breastfeeding. So the recommendation states that as long as it's mutually desired by mom and by the child. Obviously, there are different societal pressures. There's some pushback that moms may get for extended breastfeeding, but just know, moms, that the AAP does not put a limit on the duration of breastfeeding. However, more than one feed per day is required to maintain milk supply, or if you are not actually feeding from the breast, then you'll need to use your pump more than one time per day to make sure that you're maintaining your milk supply. So moms, if you're able, please eat food from all of the food groups. Calculating calories is not very accurate and it's time consuming, so you can disregard a lot of the information that's out there about maintaining specific calorie needs unless you are struggling with your appetite, unless you're struggling with what you should be eating and you feel like you're not eating enough calories to maintain your milk supply, then but just know that if you're counting calories, a lot of the apps that are out there are not very accurate. So use that more or less as a general guideline, not as the gospel, but only calculate your calories if you're unsure if you're eating enough. Moms, please eat in a structured manner if you can. And I know sometimes this can be easier said than done. But if you're feeding your children in a structured manner, so that means set times for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, set times for sit down snacks, then moms, you need to do the same thing to feed yourself. This is going to help you achieve greater variety because if you're spending some time, not a lot of time, but if you're spending some time thinking about how you're going to feed yourself, you're going to get bored with your food pretty quickly. So if you can, strive for variety. If you're eating in a structured manner, you're going to stay regulated with your hunger and fullness cues. It's really easy for mom to put her needs and her self-care on the back burner, but if you're not going to stay regulated with your hunger and fullness cues, and if you're having a hard time finding time to sit and eat during the day and taking care of yourself during the day, you're going to have a hard time, maintaining an adequate milk supply. Eating in a structured manner also helps you to have a positive relationship with food, and that's really important in families that are managing food allergy because absolutely food can be scary, but there's a lot of food that is out there that's available to you, that's available to your child with FPIES. So we want to really focus on food seeking behavior, not food avoidance behavior. And when children see their parents sitting and eating with them, that's going to help teach your children about food. And it's going to encourage food-seeking behavior in yourself and in your children. So how you feed yourself is probably more important than what you're feeding yourself in terms of maintaining your milk supply and making sure that you are eating adequate amounts of food to protect your body nutritionally. So the structure, the how you're feeding yourself is very important. So continue to take a prenatal vitamin that also includes some iodine, zinc, and selenium. Iron is not required for moms unless she knows that she is anemic. Mom, if you need to follow an elimination diet because you have a baby that's highly allergenic and is susceptible to food allergic reactions when you eat certain foods because those proteins are in your breast milk, please seek specific dietary advice from a food allergy specialist dietitian. Because like we said, it's important that you make sure that you're eating as much variety as possible. And it's also good to get some dietary advice on what complementary foods to introduce to baby as well. So, infant toddler demand is one of the major factors that determines milk volume. So, that's why it's important that you're pumping or that you're feeding from the breast at least once a day. But, however, let's keep in mind there are other factors that can decrease milk supply, and we're not just talking about mom's calorie intake or fluid intake. Yes, those can influence, but there are other factors that can decrease milk supply as well. That includes maternal stress, it's probably a big one, anxiety, it's a very big factor. Fatigue, especially if you have multiple children that you're taking care of. If mom is experiencing any illness, if mom has any insulin resistance, or if she's taking hormonal oral contraceptives or smoking, those can also decrease the milk supply. For children, we've already commented that breast milk provides increased calories, protein, and fat to meet the demands of an intense growing period for the older baby and the toddler. Complementary foods need to allow children to experience flavor, texture, temperature, and then also practice with the self-feeding. So you want to feed your children in a low pressure fashion, and you have that structure to meals and snacks, as I've already said before. So that structure really is important for helping to encourage that food seeking behavior and feeding in a low pressure fashion so that we can have a positive relationship with all of the many safe foods that are out there. Try to include iron-containing foods as anemia can develop during periods of rapid growth in children. As children get older, breast milk absolutely can be used to supplement protein and fat. In addition to those complementary foods, try to include foods that are good sources of calcium and vitamin D, which are great for growing bones. There are plenty of non-dairy sources of calcium. There are plenty of plant-based milks that are fortified. And then, of course, we've got veggies and all kinds of other foods that are sources of calcium and vitamin D. And as we already said, fat is very important to the growing brain. So try to include a variety of sources of fat, as is tolerated by your child. And then here are some references for your information. Thank you so much for joining me for some tips on nutrition and breastfeeding for moms and for children.
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Trill Paulin. I'm a molecular biologist and the founder of Free to Feed. It is my distinct honor to talk to you today, and I'm so excited to kind of walk you through my own journey and my own story, what I'm working on right now, and give you some information that you can use in your own journeys. So thank you to the FPIES Foundation for having me, and I'm going to start out by digging into kind of what brought me to this place. Why am I talking to you today? So in my last year of grad school, I was in the midst of getting a PhD in cellular and molecular biology, and my research was in how we could analyze and manipulate proteins to ensure that ovarian cancer patients could be resusceptible to chemotherapy agents. Pretty cool, and I really enjoyed my work. And in my last year of grad school, I decided to start my family with my husband, which I can't say I super recommend. So we started our family and had our first daughter, and she had awful colic. She screamed constantly. We took her to the doctor, and we were really just brushed off and sent back home. Fast forward a few more weeks, and we woke up to find her completely covered in a rash with several bloody diapers, one right after another. And as new parents, as any type of parent, it was completely terrifying. So we took her back in, and we were really, again, brushed off and sent back home and said, well, maybe consider removing cow's milk protein from your diet since you're breastfeeding. And so I did that, but my daughter continued to spiral. She continued to get worse. And eventually we were admitted to the hospital where it was determined that she had severe food intolerance, but that's about all that they would tell me. And so they said, my only option was to switch to a hypoallergenic formula. And this hypoallergenic formula was made out of corn syrup, highly processed, and crazy expensive. And if I can be totally upfront and honest, as a new parent who was a grad student, I just quite simply could not afford the formula that they were offering. And so I went from feeding my baby something that hurt her to like not being able to afford to feed my baby at all. And with grad school, you're literally not allowed to get a second job. So I started asking the questions then of, okay, well, if you're able to make a hypoallergenic formula, could I technically make a hypoallergenic breast milk? And the answer was a hesitant, yeah, you can, but it'll be awful. Because we can't test your daughter to figure out what she's reacting to, you may have to remove a lot of foods in order to get to the point where she's no longer reacting. And so at that point, I really felt like I didn't have any other options, and I really truly wanted to keep breastfeeding. So I did exactly that. I removed many foods from my diet, and I breastfed her for a year. And then fast forward to my second daughter being born with the same issue and going through the same journey with her. The second time around though, I was out of grad school, hallelujah, and I was able to really like pop my head out of the sand this time around and look around and be like, oh man, where are the organizations to help me through this? And why hasn't there been a diagnosis for my children? And what is happening here? And so I started looking around and I found amazing organizations like the FPIES Foundation, thank you, to help me navigate this space. And I wanted to really dig in on the science behind the breastfeeding piece. And so that is where I founded Free to Feed. Free to Feed creates science-based content and research for parents who are breastfeeding through infant food allergies and intolerance, such as FPIES. And so with that, my goal since creating Free to Feed has been not only to take all of the scientific research that's available and translate it into digestible content, pun intended, for everyday parents, basically to have all of the information that I wish I had had when I was sitting at the hospital with my sick daughter. And so that's really where it started. It started with like, how do we take this science and make it something that everyday moms can read and understand and be able to utilize, to really me understanding the large chasm that exists for research in this space, and for the FPIES space, for the breastfeeding space, for really, you know, moms and maternal health overall. And so this led to an evolution of the company from simply being how do we create content for parents to navigate this space, to how do we change the entire system so that we have the actual research that we need and we have the products and content that parents need to not only be informed effectively, but also be empowered in order to give them the power to continue breastfeeding if that's what they choose, or to make the right choices based on their situation and their family. And that is 100% my goal right now. So where Free to Feed is currently, we are working on a test strip that will allow moms to test their breast milk for the presence of allergens at home. So a very simple test strip mechanism where mom will be able to express milk onto the strip or thaw some milk in her freezer, in her stash, see exactly what proteins are present in her milk in order to inform her breastfeeding journey through things like FPIES or similar allergic and intolerant issues that the baby may have. And we're at early stage, but we are pushing forward. We have a grant that we're kicking off very, very soon with the University of Idaho, looking at cow's milk protein and soy as it transfers to mom's breast milk, really looking at that timing and the dose response and all of the things that you really think would be readily available for parents. So that is what I'm currently working on. I am absolutely in love, not only with this community, but also with my work. I'm literally my customer segment, if you will. I am a food allergy mommy, and I've lived in this space, and I am so incredibly honored that I have the background and the resources that I need to push forward. And so we're constantly doing that. So with that, because of my research, because of my background, because of my personal experience, I specifically wanted to talk to you today about breastfeeding and FPIES. And what's interesting here is that obviously everyone's journey is going to be completely different. And what we find is that some moms need to adjust their diet based on their child's triggers. So some moms will readily transfer proteins to their breast milk to the point where it can cause a trigger for the infant or for the child, while others do not. So it's really nuanced based on your own situation, your own experiences. You may come to find that your little one may be FPIES to oats, but you're able to eat oats. So I want to talk about that a little bit. Why is that the case? So a few things. One, when you eat oatmeal, for example, your body's going to digest that oatmeal and it's going to break it down. So we're taking that full version of the protein and we're breaking that protein down into smaller fractions, if you will, before it then can transfer through your intestinal barrier into your circulatory system. And of course, we know that breast milk is made out of blood. So then those proteins transferred through your gut can transfer to your breast. For some women, this happens very readily. They transfer all kinds of things to their breast milk, and we've seen this scientifically proven back in the 70s, but more readily in 2019 and in 2020, we have actual sequences. So we know exactly what those sequences look like when they enter breast milk, which is so vital to like leaping forward this research of breast milk contents and components and how that impacts the infant. So for some mommies, oatmeal might be off the table because they may not break that protein down enough so that their little doesn't react to it, or they may very readily transfer that protein to their breast milk, while others may not. And it can even change based on the protein. You may very readily transfer corn and not so readily or not at all transfer oats. It really depends on the mom and the infant. So like that cohesive unit is different for every single journey, which is really unfortunate. There isn't like a hard and fast answer there. The next thing I want to talk about is like, well, should I breastfeed at all? Is that in any way, shape, or form valuable for my journey? And what I'll say is absolutely yes. If you can continue to breastfeed, and if that's something that you choose and you want to continue to do, we find that so many families, parents, children benefit from that breastfeeding relationship. And the reason being is that as your child begins to grow and you start trialing foods and you start getting new foods into the baby's diet, first, very early, what's important is they're getting nutrients from you. So it's so very important for many babies that they continue to breastfeed, because that in many ways is their only source of nutrition. And it's also a source of comfort. So then as we push forward and we're going through this journey of trialing foods and getting safes and knowing what our fails are, and really navigating this space. And I know this space can be so incredibly difficult, that you have like breast milk and breastfeeding to kind of come back to, right? So as you're trialing, you may trial corn, for example, and you may have a fail and your baby or little one, 1, 2, 3, however old they may be. I'm totally game for and appreciate every mommy who's breastfeeding past 1, and that can be so powerful for those of you who have FPIES littles. So essentially what can happen is, like I mentioned, you can trial corn, there's a reaction there, and then there's this time where breast milk may be the only nutrients that they're getting. It may be that the reaction is very severe, or they have a food aversion, right? So they're like, no, actually, that hurt me, not interested, thanks. But they see breastfeeding as still being comforting, and so that is how you can still get all the nutrition that, the nutrition that they really need. Now, can that happen with other sources, such as formula? Absolutely, 100%. But what I can say is that for those who do continue to breastfeed, what I have heard from lots of mommies who've been able to extended breastfeed as well, especially, is that it can be super helpful, especially on the comforting side, and helpful for mom to know that there's something she can do, right? There's something that mom can do to provide comfort during a reaction, to provide nutrients, to provide fluids, and that can be so incredibly powerful for mom and for baby. And then there are other parents where like that's really not feasible. I can tell you a little bit about my journey as we push forward. I was only able to, and I say only with a grain of salt because I'm super proud of it, I was able to breastfeed for a year for both of my daughters. And at that point, at a year mark, I'm also in the military, as I maybe had mentioned earlier. I'm also in the military, and I ended up with military duty around that time that they turned 1 for both of them, and they both weaned at that point. And so that kind of option, if you will, was taken off the table. But I know in my own personal experience that would have been beneficial for us to continue breastfeeding. So with that being said, I want to leave you guys with a few nuggets. One, choosing what's best for your family and your situation and your journey is 100% the right thing to do. Some of you, that's going to be extended breastfeeding. Some of you, that's going to be switching to a formula because your dietary changes may just be too much for your journey and your story, and that's totally fine. 100% mommy and family should do what's best for them. Absolutely. And you can keep breastfeeding if you want. You are more than capable to continue breastfeeding through your journey. I help hundreds and hundreds of mommies breastfeed and continue breastfeeding, even if they are transferring proteins to their breast milk. Some of the things that you can do that I'd like to leave you with for some extra tips in order to potentially reduce the transferability, if you will, to your breast milk, we can work on really impacting what your intestinal permeability looks like. So a few things we can do to impact that. One, making sure you're staying very hydrated. I recommend that mommy consumes at least 100 ounces of water every single day. And if you're not anywhere near that, to build up to that, because it can help to continuously flush the system, right? So if you have proteins that are stagnant in your intestine, then it's more likely than that protein just really sitting there has a better chance of then transferring through your intestinal barrier. The next thing you can do is something that I hate telling my mommies because I am a mommy and I know how ridiculous this sounds, but if you can reduce your stress level, it can be so incredibly helpful, because cortisol levels and increases in cortisol levels especially can increase your intestinal permeability. It essentially like breaks the junctions between your cells in your gut. So as you see this spike in cortisol levels, you can increase the chance of those proteins transferring to your breast milk. So take some deep breaths, go for a walk, do some yoga, whatever it is that is a de-stressor for you. Use this as Dr. Trill said, I have been given the stamp of approval to take all the bubble baths that I need to. So the last thing that I recommend is to not consume any foods that cause you problems. So if you know that maybe baby doesn't have any sort of soy intolerance, but when you eat it, it causes you distress. Maybe you have diarrhea or constipation or your mouth itches or any other potential response to a particular food. I recommend that mommy not consume foods that causes a reaction in her own body, because that too will cause kind of a cyclic nature of you increasing the chance and increasing your intestinal permeability is what the research has shown. And then you kind of get this cyclic nature of like, you're increasing your intestinal permeability because you're eating a food that's causing that to occur, that increases, and then you get just a cyclic nature of your reaction response. So those are 3 things you can kind of take away from this if you're going to continue breastfeeding and you want to try to reduce the likelihood and the amount of protein that you're transferring from your diet to your breast milk. I'm super, super honored, as I mentioned, to chat with you today. I'm happy to answer any of your questions that you may have. Definitely reach out to me. We're on all the platforms. So first and foremost, you can find me on freetofeed.com. And you're welcome to subscribe there. We have master classes that are coming out that are sponsored, so they'll be free for you, which I'm super excited about. Or if you're interested in sponsoring a class, that's also an option. We have, I'm happy to answer questions. We have one-on-one consults for those mommies who are really like in the trenches and are currently breastfeeding. So if you're breastfeeding and you cannot figure out what the triggers are, what's causing these reactions, how to navigate that space, I'm happy to help you navigate that. I've worked with hundreds of mommies. And then also on the other side of it, if you're breastfeeding and you're like, I went down to a total elimination diet, also known as a TED in this space, and now I really need to get some food in my face. I also help mommies with that. So I help mommies through like reintroduction phases when it's through her diet or baby's ready to start solids. So I'm super happy to help you. Shoot me a message. You can also find me on info@freetofeed.com, or like I said, any of the platforms. I will say my favorite platform to share on is Instagram. We have lots of awesome content there. So happy to talk to you today. You're doing an amazing job, and I'm sending all my love.
Say thank you to Alexia and Dr. Trill. You have both presented a wealth of information today, and I am sure this will really help a lot of families. I know I wish I had this information 11 years ago when I started breastfeeding my first child. Thank you to everyone joining us here today in our discussion on breastfeeding and FPIES. My name is Amanda LePew, and many of you know me as one of the FPIES Foundation co-directors. I'm also a mom to two amazing girls, ages 8 and 11, who both happen to be diagnosed with FPIES. Our family's story may sound familiar to many of you, at least in some ways. I debated about what I wanted to speak with you about today. There really is such a volume of memory and emotion attached to the breastfeeding relationships that I had with my daughters. What I finally arrived on was that I aimed to emphasize some parts of our journey that gave us the most hope and helped us to push through the toughest days as well as enjoy the sunnier times. And with that, away we go. Our family's journey with FPIES began with the birth of our first daughter. I received great nursing support from the hospital, but no one seemed to be able to explain why she screamed most of the day and night, why she seemed to choke when she would lay down, or why she had a few random episodes of epic vomiting. Once we introduced solids at 6 months old, rice cereal, witnessing what we now know were acute FPIES reactions, things started to become a bit clearer. So I searched for her symptoms in a scholarly journal search engine, and I found an article that seemed to be written about her. I brought it to her pediatrician for review, along with my notes about her episodes, and a month later, she was diagnosed with FPIES. I continued to nurse her as we continued managing her FPIES, eliminating the foods that caused clear reactions for her. And though we faced many challenges, I was able to nurse her for 30 months. Shortly after my oldest turned 3, we welcomed our second daughter into the world. This time I started out nursing while eliminating a few different foods, all dairy and soy. Now, I figured if my new baby didn't show any of these early issues we had seen in her sister by about 6 weeks old, then I would plan to slowly add dairy and soy back into my diet. Unfortunately, that day never came. Instead, when she was 6 weeks old, I had started a very strict elimination diet, eating only 13 foods with the hopes of being able to introduce more foods over time. I chose the foods based on what was safe for my older daughter. Her diet was relatively low allergen, and then I added a few other foods to increase my protein and my calcium intake. So once I started this elimination diet, I did make sure to do a few things. I continued to use a food journal to really track what was going on based on my diet and the times where I was seeing issues with my daughter's perceived tolerance. And then I sought help from the food allergy team that we knew. We already had this great food allergy team in place for my older daughter, and it was a big help when we started seeing issues in our new little baby, that we had a team already on board who knew our family and that we trusted, and it made a big difference. Next, I visited a dietitian and evaluated the nutrition in my diet. Happily, we were able to meet with a food allergy friendly dietitian who was really able to discuss with me some of the things that I might need in my diet as a breastfeeding mom, but also some creative ways to meet my nutritional needs while sticking to a low allergen diet. So at 4 months old, the difference was phenomenal. My younger daughter was at a much stabler place than my older daughter was at that age, and I was able to successfully nurse her for 34 months. The majority of that time I did remain on a 13 food elimination diet. So one of the adages that you hear a lot in the FPIES community is every child is different, and I learned the same thing with my two daughters. So some of the things I learned were as follows. I avoided trialing foods from my diet for my daughter's food trials. And the reason I did this was our first few trials were pretty disastrous, and I ended up losing foods from my diet and needing to replace them. So I decided early on that when we started trials, we were going to introduce foods that were going to be nutritionally beneficial to my daughter, but also weren't already in my diet or weren't something that we already suspected was a problem for her before I started cutting out so many foods from my diet. Next, in our case, we learned that even a tiny bit of something, even in my diet, could cause a big reaction. I also learned, so importantly, to listen objectively to advice that was given, but also to trust my gut. And we'll get into this a little bit later. So once my diet was balanced, I focused on adding to my babies. Baby safe foods equaled my safe foods. I was careful to maintain the best nutrition and self-care that I was able in order to maintain my supply. My older daughter had reacted to every elemental formula we tried, and we didn't know if the same thing would happen with my younger daughter or not, and we didn't really want to find out when she was super young, so maintaining my supply was really essential for us. I froze a lot of my safe meals in advance so I wouldn't have to add extra time with daily food prep. My older daughter, she was still very actively reacting to a variety of foods and had a restricted diet, so her food preparation took a bit longer, and I didn't really want to detract from that. So freezing my foods helped with that whole process. I also used music to help facilitate the feeding process with both nursing and food introductions. And in a couple slides, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about how I did that. You may already know my background professionally is as a board-certified music therapist, and I was fortunate enough to already be aware of research that had been done using different music therapy interventions with feeding to increase efficient feeding and also to increase positive feeding behaviors. So really, in summation, our family's keys to navigating FPIES and breastfeeding, we learned that documentation matters so much, and that's not just for the baby but also for the mom. We learned it's really essential to have that supportive medical team in place. It made a huge difference when I look at the infancy of my older daughter, when we did not have consistent medical care, and the medical care we received when she was an infant was relatively poor. Whereas with my second daughter, we received excellent medical care, and that support made a big difference. And finally, another word we hear a lot in the FPIES community, knowing your child's baseline, especially when you're nursing and your child appears to be reacting to foods in your diet. It is really important to be aware of what their baseline is when you're trying to sort through things, so that you can get an idea of what it might look like when they're recovering from reaction, or maybe when they're reacting to something new versus what their typical baseline is. So one key overlying point I'd really like to emphasize is that when you're breastfeeding a baby or a young child with FPIES, it's important to look at as a journey. It is not a stroll through the park. And as you're on that journey, you want to keep certain things in mind. So I just added some of the things that helped me to navigate that journey with both my daughters, and just some little things I learned along the way, and I hope that they will also help you as you navigate your own journey. So the first thing, you want to find your people and connect. And by what I mean is FPIES can be so isolating sometimes, as we all know, and it is so important to find those support networks. And sometimes those support networks can be in places we might not expect. So when you're breastfeeding, it's important to have a general support network for breastfeeding questions. Things like positioning, general breastfeeding issues like mastitis or blocked duct, or how to operate a pump or where to get a pump. Different things like that are not really FPIES specific, but they help you to maintain your breastfeeding relationship. So even if a nursing support group or a nursing consultant doesn't really fully understand FPIES, as long as they're supported, they can offer excellent advice on nursing basics. Are there different nursing positions to try? Maybe a new position could help ease a feeding situation when you're trying to figure out an elimination diet. Maybe nursing in a group with other moms can help you to relax, at least for the moment, even if it can't take away the ongoing stress of FPIES. So having that breastfeeding support is really essential. And even if you don't feel comfortable with the group, maybe you have a close friend or family member that has a lot of experience with breastfeeding that you can really rely on for that support. Another area to consider is seeking out playgroups with moms that have kids with different needs. So all the babies in the group may have a different diagnosis, but you can still find a lot of support from other parents who understand all that juggling that comes with managing specialist appointments, daily management of a diagnosis, and how it impacts all the aspects of child development in general. So those support groups can be really helpful as well. And of course, the online FPIES support groups, you may feel comfortable connecting with lots of people in the group, or you may, end up messaging back and forth with a family that seems to have a lot of similarities to yours. When we first connected through the online support groups, my older daughter was 10 months old. It took me a long time to feel comfortable. And when I first started reaching out, I felt so much more comfortable connecting with other moms that, had children about the same age as mine and just seemed to have similar experiences. So it all depends on what you're most comfortable with, but having that support there for when you need it is really important. And just a little note on relationships. It's okay to back off of certain relationships, even if they've been close friendships that you've had for a long time, if they start to feel toxic. Unfortunately, not everyone understands food allergies or FPIES very well, and sometimes people aren't very receptive and may even outright say they don't believe in a baby having a food allergy or FPIES, and that can get toxic, so it's important that you understand it's okay to back off. It is your right to seek out self-preservation, both for your sake and for the baby's sake. The next area we want to talk about is trust your gut. No one knows your child better than you, period. True, a doctor has more medical background, unless you're a doctor. A dietitian knows more about nutritional requirements, unless you're a dietitian. But you are the expert on your baby. Your input is essential and it is valid. And if you feel like there's something not quite right, something probably is off. And you can be respectful of others' opinions while still making sure that your opinions are respected as well. The next thing I wanted to mention is access your talents and put them to work. This might sound funny in a breastfeeding conversation, but think about it. Are you an amazing organizer and a whiz at charts? Put those skills to work, crafting a symptoms journal. If your little one seems to be having difficulty tolerating your milk, are you a musician or an artist? Play some music or create some art to help relax before nursing, if at all possible. When nursing my daughters, I used to sing to them. I knew that if I was singing, my breathing would be controlled and steady, and that would in turn help to reduce my stress level. The singing and my relaxation also helped to calm the baby. And as much as possible, be mindful of being in the moment. Ask yourself, what can I do? FPIES can make us feel out of control sometimes because as parents, we want to fix the problem and we can't. So being in the moment and focusing on what you can do, I can hold my baby, I can sing to her, I can, find a quiet time to be with her. Find what you can do, and it will help you to feel more in control and more relaxed, which again, the lower stress level helps you to nurture that breastfeeding relationship. And finally, give yourself grace. Do what you can when you can. And know when to reach out. Nobody has to go through this alone. And that includes when you are nursing a child with FPIES. It's okay to reach out. So a little bit more on accessing your talents. I put this journal article link on the slide because this is what I'm referencing when I'm talking about some of the effects that they've studied on music and feeding in infants. So as a board certified music therapist, I was already familiar with this work that was being done, and I thought maybe it could help with my daughters when they were struggling and being really fussy when they were nursing. So I took what I knew from my profession and I adapted it to help my daughters with their nursing. And the end result was lower stress, more efficient nursing sessions, and a more firmly established nursing relationship. So another consideration some of you might be thinking about is extended breastfeeding. The decision to nurse for any period of time is unique to each family. You do what you can and what works best for the mom and the baby. And it's really important to know that even though at 12 months you may feel like you're an old hat at nursing, support is just as essential when choosing to breastfeed beyond 12 months. Sometimes society, depending on where you live, can be a little judgmental, and having that extra support in place or having other moms who are also choosing to extended breastfeed can really help you to be encouraged to continue to nurse for the period of time that you feel comfortable with. So as you're extended breastfeeding, just like any other developmental stage, the age and stage of your growing toddler can impact your nursing style. So just keep that in mind when they're nursing. If the time frame they're nursing for might change, their behaviors when they're nursing, you might need to find a quieter place for them to nurse because they might get more distracted. So just kind of tune into what's going on with the age and stage of your growing toddler and try to see what helps to maintain that relationship and coping with the different behaviors and norms for that age and stage. And just as when you're nursing an infant, you want to check in with a dietitian periodically to review your diet and the nutritional needs that are important to you and that are important to your baby. And finally, don't forget your breastfeeding health. You want to be sure that your own general practitioner is knowledgeable about the basics of breastfeeding health and some common issues that can arise. be sure that your practitioner supports your decision to breastfeed. And if you do need to undergo any medical procedure while breastfeeding, be sure that all practitioners involved in your care are aware, and they help to support your nursing relationship throughout the course of your treatment. I had a heart procedure done when my older daughter was 9 months old, and there was a lot of preparation involved to make sure that I had a pump in advance so that I could pump milk for her. At 9 months old, she was on a food break, and she actually didn't have any safe solids that I could offer her at the time. And so having that pump in place for stored milk was important, but also, learning how to use it and making sure that none of my medications were going to interfere with her nursing. That was essential. So those are some of the things that your medical staff can help you with if you are planning for a procedure. And just to go back to the first point about your breastfeeding health, when I was nursing my older daughter when she was about 14 months old until she was about 17 months old, I had a horrific breast infection of some kind, and I was told by several practitioners, just stop nursing, just be done, this is a sign that you need to end. But we were really nervous at the time. She didn't have a lot of safe foods. There were a lot of things making her react, and we did not want to discontinue the nursing. So I persisted through that and continued to self-advocate, and I did eventually find a practitioner who was knowledgeable about breastfeeding and who finally helped me treat the infection and the pain. So it's important to remember, you want to advocate for your child, but you also want to advocate for your own practitioners to be familiar with your breastfeeding choices. And finally, if you have any questions about this or any other presentation, please contact us at contact@thefpiesfoundation.org for any information that you may need. If you would like to forward any questions to the presenters, please feel free to send them our way and we will pass them along. Again, thank you all for joining us here today, and we appreciate your time so much. I hope you enjoy the presentations on Global Day, and I hope you check back in with us later on for more. Thank you so much and have a great day.